Welcome to the city. I'm Anthony Wilson, the Public Information Officer for the City of San Angelo. And today, for the entire episode, we're joined by our new police chief, Frank Carter. Chief, we appreciate you being with us.
It's an honor. Thanks for the invite.
Now, it's hard to imagine at this point that anyone doesn't know that we have a new chief and that you are the new chief. But for those who aren't familiar with your background, I'd like you to talk a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born and raised here in San Angelo. I spent 12 years in the Army National Guard. A portion of that time was down on the Texas-Mexico border, assisting U.S. Customs, searching for illegal contraband. Grew up in the law enforcement community, if you will. My father worked for the police department here for 30 years, retiring as assistant chief. My sister worked at the police department, retiring after 20 years in the records division. As far as myself, come this October, I'll have 24 years of service with the San Angelo Police Department. So our family combined, that's 74 years of service with the city of San Angelo and the police department here.
So when you first became a police officer, what was driving that decision to enter law enforcement?
Well, it's in your blood. It's a family thing. It's traditional. And like I said, my father was a police officer here. My grandfather was a police officer or sheriff. So it's in the blood, you know, working with U.S. Customs down on the border. You know, I've got a stronger taste for that. So I wanted to carry on the tradition, and my goal's always been to help people. And I felt like that was the right place for me.
So what do you like about the job?
I love helping people. I love meeting people. You know, since I ran for police chief, I was born and raised here, like I said. I knew a lot of people already, but I've come to realize I know a lot more now after becoming chief of police, and it's been very exciting to meet these people.
So up until your election as police chief back this past summer, what was the one assignment that you really enjoyed the most on the SAPD?
Not one single position probably stands out. They all overlap. You know, I was a canine officer, and of course just a patrol officer, if you will, and I was in the Lake Division or in charge of that. I was in criminal investigation. The majority of my time has been on patrol, and I would probably have to go back to those roots and that basis, knowing that I was in the position to help people the most in the patrol side of things.
Why did you want to run for chief?
I feel like there's a time and place for everything. There's a calling, and I felt like this was my calling. After 24 years of service, I saw where our strengths and weaknesses were in the department. I had a lot of officers and citizens asked that I run for chief of police, and I felt there were some changes that needed to be made, so here we are.
You mentioned those strengths. What are the strengths of the SAPD?
I think our relationships with the community. And I think that needs to continue. The professionalism these officers have, the way they treat the community, and their drive and their commitment. These guys, you know, they go out every day, guys and gals every day, and they're professionals. They're no different than you and I. They put their pants on the same way. Their families, they have families, but they show compassion for their community they work for.
And you mentioned weaknesses. Where do you think that you can help improve upon the department?
I think manpower. You know, we'll talk more about it, I'm sure, in the future here, but I think transferring to a 12-hour shift. We're working a 10-hour configuration now. The 12-hour shift obviously gives the officer more time off to spend with his family, which I think family life is very important. You must have a balance between your profession and your family life to have a healthy relationship. I think with that 12-hour shift, we can cut the budget in overtime. It's more efficient.
What's your vision for the SAPD?
Well, I think with any police department to be crime-free. You know, that's the goal of the police department, protect and serve and the lower crime rate. We know that's impossible. But I think with this administration, we make some changes, put some things in place to help reduce that crime rate.
This was your first time running for office. What was that experience like?
An eye-opener. You know, my father ran for chief back in 1978, so I approached my mother and said I had plans on running for chief. She didn't like that. She said, now they're going to talk bad about you and say a bunch of things. So it took a week or two to convince my mother that I was going to do this regardless, and she ended up being my strongest supporter. So it was a challenge. It was a long 5 months. I'm glad it's over, but we've got our sleeves rolled up, and we're moving forward, and we're getting work.
Well, before we talk about that work, one follow-up question to that. What did you learn about the experience of running for office that perhaps you didn't know beforehand?
Well, I didn't know politics at all. Like I said, it's a new experience to me. The campaign manager that I chose didn't know anything about politics either. And when I approached her, she was very hesitant, and that's what she told me. Exact words were, Frank, I know nothing about politics. And I said, well, that's great. Neither do I. We'll do good together. And we did. And congrats to her performance and all her help.
Now, you had an awful lot of police officers who were publicly endorsing you. Why do you think that was?
I think part of it was they saw the need for change. We became stale. The other part of it, 17 of those 24 years, I've been a supervisor within the police department, either a sergeant or a commander. So many of these officers within the department I'd already supervised, and I think they saw the leadership skills and the abilities that I had to move the department forward.
Now, you won the runoff against a three-term incumbent, and it was a landslide. Why do you think that margin of victory was as great as it was?
I think the community in a whole was prepared for change. I mean, 12 years is a long time. That's 3 terms. Tim, Police Chief Vasquez did some excellent things for this department. I can't take that away from him. I just think all in all, it was time for a change. My relationships with the community, and me being born and raised here and knowing people, and the strategy that we had with my campaign manager and the steering team, I think solidified and made that such a huge margin.
Were you surprised by the margin?
I really wasn't. We didn't want to ever get overconfident during the campaign. We were hearing some strong things from the community, from the steering committee, but by the same token, we stuck with our plan. We continued to move forward. We were very humbled and we were honored with the results.
So about a month ago, you were sworn in here in the City Council chambers. After that, you walk into the chief's office on your first day. What's on your itinerary?
Just short of a month today. It was July the 12th. Itinerary was to go and look at the office and to rearrange it and put some stuff in there, personalize the office. But to this day, that really hasn't happened. Soon as I left here getting sworn in, they said, by the way, Chief, you need to come greet 50 or 60 law enforcement officers from around the state. And I welcome them into our community. We've got a operation that's been going on undercover for the last year, and let's get busy and go talk to them. So it's been continuous since then.
So, I mean, obviously, you've probably been up to your eyeballs in getting things structured the way that you want. What were the things that you knew that you needed to address most immediately?
I think command changes. Obviously, making my appointments to the assistant chiefs first and foremost. I made those decisions in the appointments that I did. Next was commanders in certain divisions and sections, and they were the next to move, and the changes that I made. On top of that, I wanted to get on the 12-hour shifts. Like I said, there's several benefits to that, one being reducing overtime and the other being manpower. It adds manpower going from a 10 to a 12-hour shift. We're only allotted so many officers, and we only have so many officers. So by going to this, it expands the number of officers that are working the streets.
You mentioned about the appointment of your assistant chiefs. What were you looking for in particular when you made those appointments?
I was. Those decisions didn't start July 12th when I was sworn in. They didn't start during the campaign. They started 20 years ago. I worked side by side with each one of those guys that I decided to pick. The biggest thing that I probably looked for was leadership. Without leadership, you cannot be an effective leader. And tenure obviously was very important and experience, but I wanted them to be on the same page as me and to have the same goals and visions so we could work together as a team.
So one of those officers that you chose to be an assistant chief served in that capacity under your predecessor, Robert Martinez, and that surprised some people. Why did you decide to keep him in that position in your administration?
It did. It surprised a lot of people. I made no promises throughout my campaign, and there had always been talk that all 3 assistant chiefs would be fired. I kept my lips sealed. Mr. Martinez has 35 years of service come this October. I knew where his experience was, and during the transition, he's helped tremendous amount. There was things that went on in the past administration that bleed over, but that was based on his experience and the number of people that he's helped and knows in the community, and we can continue to progress in that manner.
So how many officers do we have on the SAPD?
There's 162 sworn officers, and that includes 4 part-timers right now. The city of San Angelo allows us 165.
And so how challenging is it to try to make sure that each of those officers is in the exact position and place where you think they can best serve the SAPD and the community?
Sure, it is a challenge. It starts from the top. Obviously, it started with assistant chiefs, and I made those moves and the decisions that I did make, and then it goes down to the commanders, placing those commanders where you think is fit, the best fit for the department and for those officers. Those have been and set, and then it goes down to the sergeants and then on down to the officers. So it is a bit of a challenge. I think I made the right decisions and placed the right supervisors in the right divisions and places so they can show their strengths.
So obviously it helps that you've had years and in some cases decades of experience with these folks.
Sure, you know, we all work together. I know their strengths and weaknesses, just like I spoke about in the department in whole. So I think the placements we made were excellent.
When you talk about commanders, some people may not be aware of sort of what that structure is. What are they exactly commanding?
Sure. Our rank structure is chief, assistant chiefs, then lieutenants, which we call commanders, and then sergeants and patrol officers. But they are commanders of several of the different divisions or sections within the police department, whether it be criminal investigations, whether it be street crimes, whether it be training, those particular sections and divisions.
So are there changes that you are planning on implementing and initiating that you haven't yet undertaken?
There will be some future changes probably. Right now, the ones that I wanted to make imminent are in place. There's talks right now with other law enforcement officers, both at the federal, the state, and county level about having a memo understanding, if you will, or a task force where we all come together and fight gangs and narcotics in our county and our community.
You know, during the election, there was a lot of talk about sector policing. Explain exactly what that is and sort of how you see that. And I know that you are implementing a change sort of that moves away from that.
Sure. Well, I think we must not get away from the ultimate goal of policing is to protect and serve and reduce crime. Regardless if you're sector-style policing or beat policing or problem-oriented policing or crime intelligence policing, there's many models out there. But let's not forget the ultimate goal there in basic police work is to solve crime. Sector-style policing is great if you have the manpower. And it's basically, the theory is that the patrolmen work together with criminal investigation and narcotics and they attack the root of a crime. If there was burglaries in a certain area, you're not attacking the burglaries. What's causing that? Maybe it's street lighting is out. But in theory, it's good. Some departments it works great. It takes a lot of manpower. I know district policing works. We used to do it, and that's what we're going back to. I want to get more officers back in the neighborhood. That kind of ties in with going back to the 12-hour shifts, expanding the number of manpower. It gives that officer ownership for those smaller particular areas. When you have a burglary in there, I used to take offense. They used to take offense. This is my area. It also lets that neighbor, the residents that live in that neighborhood become familiar with the police officer they used to back in the day. That officer knows when something's out of place. You know, I know they're at work 8 to 5 and this vehicle shouldn't be here. So it gives you more commitment to that particular area.
So it's what some of us might know as sort of a police patrolling or walking a beat.
There you go. You know, it's beat police and district police and whatever you want to call it. It's just basically shrinking the area, assigning officers in that specific area, and letting him become more familiar with that particular area.
So you mentioned we have more than 160 officers right now. I'm just curious, in order to effectively do sector policing, how many more officers would that take?
You know, our patrol, we're probably sitting at 69 on patrol. I think to be comfortable in a sector-style environment would be at least 80 patrol officers. On top of that, we had staggered shifts, so it's really hard when you have criminal investigations and narcotics working a Monday through Friday shift when you have 7-day coverage on a patrol shift with staggered days off, so it's hard to team up all three and work on a specific problem. And when I say 162, that's not working 162 officers. We have 13 of those are in the academy, 3 of which are on light duty for an extended period of time. And 4 of those are part-time officers. So when you get down to the nuts and bolts, we're only actually working at about 149 officers. So,
we're talking with our police chief, Frank Carter, and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back. We are continuing our conversation with our new Police Chief, Frank Carter. Chief, you were elected during the midst of the city's budget process, and in fact, the SAPD budget was submitted by your predecessor. How are you addressing and approaching the fiscal year 2017 budget, which begins October 1st, as you come on board?
Sure. We're in meetings as we speak, discussing the budget, and not only that, the new police department, if you will, or if that's still an option or still on the table. I've reviewed the submittals by the past administration, and in agreement with that, the biggest thing that I saw in there was an increase in manpower. Um, that's something that I want to work. You know, for the next 4 years with City Council and the city officials expanding that number. As we touched on earlier, our number we're at 162, we're allowed 165. That number was set many years ago, and our population has increased. Our crimes and calls for service have increased. So throughout the next 4 years, I would like to work with city staff and council expanding that manpower.
So you mentioned about the new police station, which obviously we're in desperate need of a new police station. So you like the proposal, the proposed location of what is currently now the First Financial Bank building downtown?
I have toured the building. I like the location. Nothing is set in stone right now. I don't even know if the city has purchased the building at this time, so I'm open for discussion as far as a location or a specific building. Like I said, we're just starting to touch on the police building, but I'm open.
You mentioned earlier you're instituting a different shift schedule for patrol officers that involves some 12-hour shifts. Talk a little bit about that shift schedule and what do you think that'll mean for the department and for your war on crime?
Obviously, we had to take that to a vote to the police officers because we're working more than 40 hours in a week. We're basically looking at it as a 14-day pay cycle, 80 hours in 2 weeks. So we're 36 hours one week, 44 hours the next week. With doing that, we're thin in the department right now. I mentioned 162, but some of those are recruits still in the academy or on light duty, so we're working at roughly about 149. So, you have to do and adapt to what you have. And just coming off a 10-hour shift going to a 12-hour configuration, that expands your manpower numbers per shift by 4. I also like it because it gives the officer more time off to spend with his family. There's actually been studies out there that prove that the 12-hour shift, you're less fatigued due to the time off. You're less likely to call in sick. I think with adding the manpower, I think we can cut the overtime budget that we've had this year in patrol just extended beyond their time of duty or due to manpower shortage.
So it sounds a little counterintuitive, but what you're saying is that uh, they'll work 12-hour shifts and they'll work a few days of that, 3 or 4 days in a row of that, but then they get 3 or 4 days off, and that's when they're able to recharge.
That's correct, and there's many benefits to it, and I looked at it from both sides, not only from the officer, but for the department and for the city as far as tax dollars and overtime spent, and of course from the officer side of things, more time off.
It was astounding. You told me earlier the number of officers who supported that. Talk about what the margin of victory was in moving to the 12-hour shifts.
And I spoke, I went to a vote. We had to poll the entire department, excluding the cadets of the academy. And there was only 9 votes that were against it, and the rest of the department who voted were for it. So those numbers were very high, considering this was our first time. Usually it's not uncommon for the first time to be voted down, and then the next time, once they get used to it, have a higher approval rate. But I was very surprised at the number of folks that were for a 12-hour shift.
We've obviously seen a string of incidents across the nation in which police officers have come under scrutiny, particularly in regards to their treatment of minority citizens. What do you make of those instances?
Well, our police department is only good as the relationship that we have with the community. And I will continue to preach to those officers to have community involvement, community policing. I'll do my part and get out there and strengthen those relationships. I often talk about the 99%. And that's the good 99%. The 99% that stands on that blue line with us, that separates evil from the good. That 1% that I speak of is the 1% that is out there that wants to hurt law enforcement. So I want to keep their heads up. I was very humbled by the community involvement, the outreach that our community had during those tragedies, whether it be an individual, a business, churches, a kid group, organizations that reached out to our department during these tough times, whether it been a goodie bag, a free meal, a thank you, a lunch, a breakfast. I'm honored for the support that this community gives our law enforcement and first responders.
Do your officers feel like they come under greater scrutiny even when something happens in Baltimore, Maryland, or Ferguson, Missouri? Do they feel like they're under greater scrutiny, and how do they typically react when they see those things?
Yeah, when an event like that happens, it's just not Baltimore. It's just not Dallas. We're family. Whether it happens to them or it happens to us, we're all tied in the family. It's a small knit group. Like I said, our relationships with the community help that. We've done nothing different as far as our tactics here in San Angelo. Our guys do remain vigilant, but as far as our tactics, we've done nothing different. And again, I think that is it has to do with the strength that we have in our bond with our community and our citizens.
Yeah, it does seem almost as if those sort of situations are foreign because there is such a close relationship between our officers and citizens.
Sure, it's very strong, and I know they're there. When things are going right, oftentimes you don't hear them. You don't see those citizens out there, but we know they're there. And when something tragic happens, they all come out and support. And for that, like I said, I'm honored to be a part of this community, to serve in this capacity as police chief of the community of San Angelo.
You mentioned when tragic things happen. Of course, we've also seen a lot of incidents of domestic terrorism here in the United States. How prepared is our department if something, God forbid, should happen like that in San Angelo?
Exactly. God forbid that it don't. We're prepared. We're continually trained throughout different sections of the department. Our department works for other departments, and of course our emergency management system. So we're prepared if something happens. But even being prepared and trained, those scenes and those things when they happen, they're chaotic. You just work through them the best you can, but we're prepared if something happens.
It must be just a sea change from the time that you entered law enforcement to now when it comes to things like that.
Oh, it's huge. Social media wasn't around back then. Cell phones, you put them in your car and they were about this big. So many things have changed. Technology and the way we police. Back in the early '90s, we did things a little bit different than we do now. Cameras, technology, computers, a lot of things have changed.
So what have you enjoyed most about being San Angelo's police chief thus
I
far?
think meeting the people, seeing their point of view about how they feel about a policeman and what their problems are. Like I touched on before, I was born and raised here, so I knew a lot of people already. That has intensified by becoming police chief. And my goal is to meet everybody. But it's been an honor meeting different citizens, different organizations, getting their views and points of what they feel like or the problems are in their community or that affect them.
How in demand is the new police chief right now?
Very much so, and I enjoy it. There's probably not a day go by that I'm not at an organization or a luncheon speaking to somebody, but I enjoy it.
You mentioned earlier that you love being a patrol officer. Is there a part of you that's perhaps mourning the fact that you're no longer in a car patrolling a district or the community?
Well, you make time for what you love, and as you can see here, I'm in a short sleeve uniform, and I'm still driving a patrol marked Tahoe. Every week I slip out of the office and I go up and do some patrolling myself, whether it be up on the north side of town on MLK, or I go to Bentwood, or I go to the southeast side. But I allow myself a little bit of time to go do some patrol work.
So what has surprised you most about Chief? Maybe something that you thought, wow, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, probably the amount of work. And I think that's been intensified not only due to a new person in the position, but the tragic events. There's been many people that reached out, which is a great thing. So I've been helped, organize those efforts, and a lot of organizations, reaching out, reestablishing their relationship, from churches and whatever it may be.
So if folks ever have any questions or concerns that they'd like to discuss with the SAPD, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Of course, I mean, we have an open door policy. If it's a complaint on officers, we have an avenue for that, which is our internal affairs division. But if they just have a basic concern or a need, they can call police administration, and they will be sent either to one of the assistant chiefs or patrol officer or commander, depending on what their question deals with.
You mentioned earlier about a little social media, and obviously the SAPD has a very active presence on social media. Do you like that sort of interaction and dialogue via the internet?
I do. Very important. The citizens out there need to know what we're doing. And I think the more information we put out there, the better we are. Like I said, our relationship is only as good as we have with the community. So I think it's great. I've informed the PIO to put as much information out there, whether, the community needs to see the good things these professionals in our department do. I think it's a great thing.
We've been talking with Frank Carter. He is the new San Angelo Police Chief, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of The City.